I still remember the sound of my mother dragging the garbage bags down the front steps. My clothes, sketchbooks, my old laptop all stuffed into ripped plastic bags, tossed on the front lawn like I was nothing more than clutter. Even my toothbrush was jammed between two shoes. The neighbors across the street pretended not to look. But I caught Mrs. Gallagher staring through her blinds, the curtain slipping through her fingers, like she was watching something shameful she couldn't turn away from. Just 2 hours earlier, I had come home from work early. I'd stopped at the bakery to get Grandpa his favorite apple tart and walked in through the back door just in time to hear raised voices. Dad was pressing Grandpa hard in the living room. He had a legal folder open on the coffee table, and Grandpa was sitting stiffly in his armchair, glasses slipping down his nose, hands trembling. Dad kept repeating, "This is for your own good. You won't even know what's happening soon." He shoved a pen into Grandpa's hand. "Sign it, now." Grandpa looked confused, glancing from the paper to Dad's face. "Well, you said this was about simplifying things," he murmured, hesitating. That's when I stepped in and said, "Don't sign anything, Grandpa. Something's not right." Dad's head snapped toward me, his face cold. "This has nothing to do with you. Back off." I stood my ground. "You're forcing him. You've been waiting for him to slip up, and now you're circling like vultures." That's when Mom came in, arms crossed, furious. "You've been manipulating him," she hissed, "making him paranoid, filling his head with nonsense." I reminded her that I was the one who'd taken Grandpa to his cardiologist when they forgot. I was the one who helped him reset his bank password when he locked himself out for the third time. I'd been there quietly picking up their slack while they lived their high-end life, hosting cocktail parties and planning ski trips. My voice cracked when I said it, but I didn't back down. That was the moment Mom pointed to the door and said, "If you think you're so noble, go live like it. You're not welcome here anymore." I wasn't even allowed to pack properly. Mom started yanking things out of my room, shoving them into bags. My high school trophy for the design contest, thrown in with a tangled phone charger and a half-eaten protein bar. She even ripped a canvas I was working on, not bothering to ask if it was finished. Dad called a locksmith the next morning to change the locks. That night, I slept in my car outside a 24-hour laundromat, using my coat as a blanket. I woke up with a stiff neck and a parking ticket. And when I tried calling Grandpa the next day, someone had taken his phone. I finally reached him through the landline. He asked if I was still coming by to trim the rosebush. I swallowed my anger and said yes. I was waking up every morning to the sound of my upstairs neighbors yelling, doors slamming like gunshots through the paper-thin ceiling, and pipes that clanged like they were falling apart. The radiator in my apartment hissed constantly but never actually warmed the place, and there was a growing patch of black mold in the bathroom that reeked like metal and mildew. I lived in that apartment because it was all I could afford between my early shifts as a barista at Beanline Cafe and the inconsistent freelance design gigs I scraped up from shady job boards. I was barely keeping my head above water. I remember once heating a can of beans with a lighter because the stove wasn't working and the landlord hadn't responded in a week. Despite everything, I tried to check on Grandpa when I could. Mrs. Kellen, his neighbor and longtime family friend, became the only reason I even knew how he was doing. She started slipping me folded notes from him, wrapped in napkins or tucked into cookie tins. One read, "They keep hiding my checkbook. Can you bring me a new one?" Another said, "The nurse says I fell. But I don't remember falling." I didn't think much of it until I visited unannounced one afternoon and saw the bruises myself. Deep purple patches on his arms, like someone had grabbed him hard. His hands trembled when he reached for a glass of water, and his lips were cracked. I opened his fridge and found a shriveled head of lettuce, a single yogurt and a bottle of mustard. No real food, no sign anyone was actually feeding him regularly. The pill organizer on the counter had Monday's slot still full, and it was already late Thursday. I confronted the nurse, asking why his meds weren't being managed, and she just smiled and said, "He sometimes refuses them, and we don't want to force him." But that didn't explain the missing food, or why Grandpa had lost so much weight his belt had to be tightened 2 notches. Something was wrong, and it went deeper than neglect. Later, I overheard my mom on the phone. She was pacing the hallway, while I sat on the back porch, out of sight. I recorded everything. Her exact words were, Once the house sells, we can clear the car loan and look into remodeling the pool. He's barely aware of what's happening. We just need him quiet until the papers are finalized. My stomach dropped. They weren't just neglecting him. They were exploiting him. The worst confirmation came when Grandpa asked me, eyes wide and confused, "Did you take the medals? The ones I kept in the cigar box?" I hadn't seen them in months. That box used to sit on his dresser, unopened, but always dusted clean. Now it was gone. So were the oil paintings from his study and the antique clock that belonged to his father. They'd sold everything they could without telling him, like he was already dead. When I first walked into Mr. Hamid's office, the air was thick with the scent of aging paper and faint cologne. He hadn't changed the decor in decades. There were files stacked up on the edges of his desk like towers about to fall. He looked over his glasses and sighed when I told him why I came. "This is family business," he said, clearly reluctant, but when I told him about Grandpa's bruises and his growing confusion, his face changed. I could see it stirred something in him. He reached into a bottom drawer, unlocked a metal box, and pulled out a thick manila envelope. "Your grandfather gave me this years ago," he said, quietly. Inside was a copy of his original will and several personal letters Grandpa had written. One said, word for word, "If they ever pressure me when my mind's not right, stop them." That letter hit me hard. Outside later that day, Mrs. Klein, our longtime neighbor who still brings her trash out wearing those pink foam rollers in her hair, waved me over. "You weren't here last night, were you?" she asked. She said she'd seen a strange man in a dark suit, leaving my parents' house just before 1 in the morning. "Didn't belong," she muttered. "Didn't even park in front. He came from down the block and left quick." That wasn't the first time. She recalled at least 3 different late-night visits, all men with briefcases, none of whom she recognized. She also handed me an envelope. Grandpa had apparently given her for safekeeping, a folded paper with a scribbled note. "They're selling my memories." It made no sense at first, until I found out what they'd been doing. Mr. Chen, Grandpa's former business partner, ran a small, dusty supply store downtown. When I stopped by, he hesitated to talk but then leaned in and told me how years ago, Grandpa had mentioned creating a trust fund with a clause to protect his legacy. If things turned ugly, he didn't know the details, but he remembered Grandpa hiding paperwork in the old furnace room. That gave me somewhere to start. When my parents were away at a conference, I slipped into the house and searched the furnace room for hours. I finally found a rusted tin box behind a loose panel. Inside were bits of scorched documents, one with Grandpa's signature, but the page had been ripped in half. It clearly said, "Amendment to Will," followed by blackened, unreadable lines. Someone had tried to destroy it, but not completely. Days later, someone posing as a bank representative came to my building asking about my job history. My neighbor told me the man was nosy, asking if I ever received money from an elderly relative. That's when I checked my laptop and found a document titled Intent Letter. I never created it. It claimed I wanted Grandpa's assets and implied he wasn't mentally fit. Mr. Hamed had a contact who ran metadata tests and proved it had been added to my files from an external drive. That forged email was supposed to destroy me, but it became proof that they were willing to fake evidence to keep their scheme going. I still remember the exact feeling in my chest the day I walked into the courtroom, palms sweating, trying not to shake as I handed over the documents. Filing for temporary guardianship of Grandpa wasn't something I ever imagined doing, but after seeing the yellowing bruises on his arms, hearing him forget whether he'd eaten that day, and finding out the antique grandfather clock he treasured had been sold without his knowledge, I knew I couldn't keep waiting. My lawyer, a young woman named Arya, with nervous eyes and a stack of notes, stood beside me. Across from us were my parents' lawyers. 4 of them. They didn't even look at me, just whispered and smirked like this was a minor inconvenience. Their attack started right away. One of their attorneys handed the judge a stack of my bank statements, highlighting months where I only made a few $100s from my freelance design jobs. "This individual," he said with a smug tone, "cannot provide financially for himself, let alone manage an estate." The judge raised an eyebrow, and I wanted to scream that this wasn't about money, It was about Grandpa waking up in the middle of the night, terrified, because he didn't know where he was. A few days later, I was picking up groceries when Mrs. Blanchard, a friend of my mother's, approached me in the parking lot. She lowered her voice and said, "I heard you've been having problems. Are you all right, dear?" I was confused until she mentioned she'd been told I was under emotional distress and might be projecting it onto Grandpa. I didn't even know how to respond. That evening, I saw a post in a private neighborhood Facebook group that read, "Some people will use any excuse to get a piece of what's not theirs." Sad, really. It had dozens of likes. No name was mentioned, but everyone knew it was about me. Worse, someone created a fake Instagram account and uploaded old photos of me from a party drinking, laughing, posing with friends. The caption underneath one read, "This person thinks they deserve power of attorney over a fragile old man." Let that sink in. The post went semi-viral locally. 3 clients canceled projects with me. One messaged, "Given the circumstances, we're pausing all design work until further notice." I pawned my drawing tablet that weekend, just to make rent. Grandpa had lucid moments that made it harder. One afternoon, I visited and he gripped my wrist, staring into my face. "They're hiding it," he whispered. "Ask Mr. Chen." Drawer in the closet. His nurse walked in then, all smiles, offering me tea like nothing was wrong. But I found the drawer later empty, except for a torn receipt from a jewelry auction. My mother had sold Grandma's ring, the one she wore for 60 years. My partner tried to be supportive, but things changed fast. They'd come home and find me buried in court papers, snapping at small questions, crying without warning. One night they said, "I don't recognize you anymore," and packed a bag. I heard the front door close and didn't get up from the kitchen floor for a long time. But I still showed up in court the next day, exhausted, clinging to every shred of proof I had, because no one else was going to protect Grandpa, not from them. I still remember the moment Kevin slid that thick folder across the coffee table, his hands trembling so badly he almost dropped it. Inside were photocopies of contracts and spreadsheets with strange property addresses that, when I checked, didn't exist or were listed as empty lots. The sales figures were suspiciously high, and each transaction seemed to circle back to Grandpa's name, even though he had nothing to do with those deals. Kevin whispered about payments routed through shell companies and city officials who ignored their irregularities. When I cross-checked some of the addresses with public records, I found dozens of complaints from neighbors about construction noise where no building permit had ever been issued. That was the first time I realized my parents were hiding something far darker than I imagined. When Grandpa was suddenly taken to the hospital, I rushed there as fast as I could, but the tension was immediate. The nurse told me bluntly that only my parents had permission to visit him, refusing to even tell me his condition. I remember standing in the sterile hospital corridor, my voice shaking as I begged to see him, only to be met with cold refusals. I asked the front desk repeatedly for his medical records and was told they were confidential, but when I pressed, a staff member muttered that the records were being held for review. It felt like a calculated effort to keep me away. Days later, when I finally convinced a staffer to check on Grandpa, they told me he'd been transferred to another facility, but when I tried to find that place, it was nowhere in the hospital system. Then the security footage of his supposed transfer disappeared from the system for hours around the time he was moved. It was clear someone didn't want anyone to know where he really was. Jasmine came into my life like a lifeline. She didn't just listen, she acted. One day she called me over with an intense look on her face and showed me a leaked email thread. It was between my parents and a city councilman, filled with phrases like fast-track zoning approval and ensure no delays. The emails detailed how the councilman promised to push through changes that would inflate the value of certain properties linked to Grandpa's estate. Jasmine showed me a document outlining a payment schedule, disguised as campaign contributions but matching suspicious deposits in the councilman's bank account. When I checked public financial disclosures, the dates lined up perfectly with these fake property sales. That was proof of bribery, and it hit me like a punch. Then came the threats. One night, I returned home to shattered glass all over the floor, and my laptop completely destroyed. My cracked phone lay on the kitchen counter, and taped to the wall was a note scrawled in red ink. "Stop digging, or else." I could still see the angry handwriting every time I blinked. After that, I installed security cameras, and almost immediately, I caught a shadow lurking outside my window late at night. I documented everything: the broken window, the smashed devices, the notes meticulously logging dates and times. Jasmine urged me to keep all evidence safe. She knew this wasn't just about family drama, but a web of corruption that could ruin us both. Despite the danger, Jasmine and I planned to expose everything. Her report named names, showing how my parents used Grandpa's estate as a front for laundering money through fake property sales, with city officials complicit in the scheme. We knew going public would put us at risk, but the truth had to come out, no matter the cost. I was ready to fight for Grandpa's legacy and for justice, even if it meant facing the darkest parts of my own family. The courtroom was packed, and I felt the weight of every eye on me as I held the small voice recorder I'd hidden under Grandpa's bed. I pressed play, and his trembling voice filled the room. He spoke about how my parents forced him to sign papers he didn't understand, how scared he was when Dad threatened him, saying, "Sign now or lose everything." I remembered how that day he had grabbed my hand tightly and whispered, "Please protect me." The judge's expression softened, and I saw my parents shift uncomfortably, their confident facade cracking. The tape wasn't just proof, it was Grandpa's fear and courage captured in real time. Then I pulled out the torn pieces of the will I had found tucked behind old photo albums in the attic. The edges were frayed, and some sections missing, but the handwriting was unmistakably Grandpa's. One fragment clearly stated his wish to create a trust that would keep his estate safe from family disputes. I explained how I stumbled upon these papers during a late afternoon when the house was empty, the floorboards creaking beneath me as I searched through dusty boxes. The memory of piecing those torn documents together, like assembling a puzzle of betrayal, felt raw. I shared how my parents' private investigator had tried to plant fake emails on my laptop, accusing me of manipulating Grandpa, but with Mr. Hamelt's help, we exposed the forgeries. I even showed the court screenshots of the fabricated messages next to the real emails, making it undeniable. Then Jasmine took the stand. She shared emails she'd uncovered, messages between my parents and a city councilman, arranging secret meetings to fast-track zoning changes that would skyrocket property values. I remembered the moment Jasmine handed me the printouts, her eyes serious as she said, "This is bigger than just your family." The chain of messages revealed bribes disguised as campaign donations. Jasmine detailed how money from fake property sales was funneled through accounts linked to Grandpa's estate. Her calm, precise delivery gave weight to every accusation, and I noticed the jury leaning in, absorbing each word. It was proof that corruption ran deeper than I had imagined. When my parents finally spoke, their voices cracked as they revealed old wounds: my mother describing how she'd sacrificed her career ambitions to support the family, and Dad tearfully confessing the pressures that pushed him to desperation. I remembered their trembling hands during that moment, the cracks in their armor, revealing raw pain beneath the greed. Still, I knew I couldn't let sympathy cloud justice. I had to stand firm. The verdict was a turning point. My parents faced criminal charges for elder abuse and fraud. Grandpa was placed under my care, and I felt the enormous responsibility settle in my chest. I vowed to restore not only the estate, but his dignity. We transformed the house into a community center filled with photos and artifacts celebrating Grandpa's legacy. At the reopening, I watched Grandpa stand before a small crowd. His voice was shaky but clear, as he praised my courage. I remember the way his eyes sparkled. Despite the years of hardship, a moment of healing made real in that room.